Hello and welcome to Enchanted Rose Costumes. My name is Marika and today I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite costuming and sewing books. I have quite a stack here, so let's get started. I hope you enjoy. So I've split my books up into a couple different categories, and since patterning is a very important category, I figured I would start there. So to start things off, these are the first costuming books that I purchased, and they are the Jean Honeysett Costuming for Stage and Screen. Now this one is the 1500s to 1800s, and it does for the most part have the correct silhouette. This also has undergarment patterns and modern build instructions for those of you who need it. So the patterns in here are really great. She also has notes on how to fit the patterns to you. One thing about these books that is good to note is the patterns are only one size. So you will need to size it up to the correct size, but there are grids in here that tell you how to size up the pattern from the book. And then you will also need to alter it to your shape. So that is something, if you are a very adventurous beginner, this might be good for you, but otherwise I would recommend these books for someone who has a bit more than beginner-based knowledge. The patterns in these books they have historical backing in them, but they are made for stage and screen. So they are not period correct if that is what you're going for, but they are a great starting point for anyone who is just getting into costuming and wants something that looks period correct. Also, I had someone ask in a couple videos back if I would be doing a 17th century mantua look, and while I'm not currently looking at doing that right now, there is a pattern in here for one on page 119. So if you are interested in doing a 17th century mantua, this book has a pattern. Now the second book is all Victorian. So it is from 1800 to 1909. And it goes into sleeves and skirts and understructures, and then they also have the summary of the period. So again, the costumes are not 100% period correct, but they do have the modern instructions on how to build things, which is great if you are just starting out. So very, very good books to pick up, and the instructions, for the most part, they're fairly simple, and there is drawings in here to help you along if you need it. My next books, they're very well known in the costuming world, is by Nora Wo. I'm never sure how to pronounce her name. Anyway, so we have Corsets and Crinolines and the Cut of Women's Clothing. So starting off with Corsets and Crinolines, the patterns are in here, range from 1670 to 1925. There are also a lot of stay patterns, which is very helpful for anyone in the 17th, 18th century. Now there's lots of information in this book. So there's newspaper articles, diary entries, letters. They're scattered throughout the book. So there's a lot of information in here. And it's not just corsets, it of course covers the understructures as well, which is very, very helpful. Now, when I first got this book, I thought it was really only patterns. I didn't really see the construction notes. It wasn't until that I was looking through it and then I realized there are some construction notes in the back of the book. So the construction of corsets starts on page 149. So that's something that's really good to know when you are just starting this book. Because when I was first looking through it, I really didn't find a lot of information. I thought it was just the patterns. So yeah, it's not just corsets, it is the understructures as well, which is really great. So the next book by Nora Wo, The Cut of Women's Clothing, is from 1600s to 1930s. So there's a very wide range of patterns in here, but I recommend, again, this book not for beginners, just because you need to have a bit of an understanding on historical construction. The patterns in here are also one size, so you need to size them up to fit yourself, which again is not something, I'm not saying that a beginner couldn't do it, but someone who has a bit more experience in sewing would find it a bit easier to do. But there is great information in this book. It's not a cheap book, so I recommend checking out your libraries and seeing if they have it. The information in here is really great, but if you do want to find it, also definitely check out secondhand stores. I was talking to someone and they got this book for 20 bucks secondhand. So that's amazing, because I don't know if this book is in print anymore. That's something I have to check. So again, like Corsets and Crinolines, it has little information tidbits. Tidbits, you can tell I'm Canadian. It has information tidbits from the period, so newspaper articles, diary entries, clippings from different things. So there's a lot of information in here, and there is a very, very wide range of patterns. So the next ones on my list, I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with this. This is a set of books, and it is Patterns of Fashion. So I only have books 1, 2, and 5. I love number 5. Oh, it's so good. It's so thick. But if actually, look at this. So book 5 is the same thickness as book 1 and 2 combined. So the amount of information in here is amazing. So starting off, I will start with book 1. The patterns from this book start from 1660 to 1860. There's 48 patterns in this book, and they are all off of extant garments. So again, these patterns only fit one size, and when you enlarge them, you will have to size them up and then alter them to your size. So again, something that a beginner may struggle with, and someone with more knowledge probably would have an easier time with. So with this book, it has a lot of information about the garment, where it's from, the time period, the material that was used, construction notes, measurements, a lot of information. But the patterns in here, you can really see the size of the patterns, just how things are cut. So it is there's a lot of information in this book. So Patterns of Fashion 2 leaves off from number 1. It is 1860 to 1940. So again, you've got the Victorian era, the Edwardian era, and into the 1940s. So again, the patterns from here are all from existing garments. There are 40 patterns in this book. 15 of them are 19th century and 25 of them are 20th century. And same as Patterns of Fashion, it tells you about the garment, where it's from, the materials, pattern, construction notes, etc., etc. Now, both those books have a lot of information. The patterns in them, or the garments in them, are from museums. So if you look through museums, you can, for the most part, find where the garment was from, and being able to see it is usually really helpful when you are trying to reconstruct something or create something from a pattern and getting the right look for the period. And Patterns of Fashion 5. So this is all on the construction, cut, and context of bodies, stays, hoops, rumps from 1595 to 1795. Now, I haven't actually used this book yet. I've just looked at all the pretty pictures. There's, again, a lot of information in this book, and these are all from extant garments. So if you are looking to create stays, rumps, hoops, everything, this is an amazing resource to pick up. This is the continuing work of Janet Arnold. The School of Historical Dress has really done some amazing work with this book, and just the amount of time they put into it and resources, it's an amazing addition to anyone's library. So next up is the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking. Now, this book was a huge help when I was constructing my robe à la Francais. It has a lot of information on sewing garments, draping them. The patterns in here are historical. Abby and Lauren really did a lot of amazing research and put a lot of really good information in here. I did find there were a couple areas that I found slightly confusing, but once I got the garment in my hand to that stage, I was able to figure out what they were trying to explain. Also, their humor in this book is great. So if you need a bit of a laugh, definitely take a look through this book. Now, the garments that they used for this book, they have 4 main ones. So the English gown, the sack gown, the Italian gown, and the round gown. So they start you off with your basic historical hand stitches, and then they break off into the 4 different looks, and they show you how to make them. Now there's a lot of steps in here and a lot of photos, which is really helpful for someone who is visual. But yes, again, I did find a couple of the steps confusing, but again, once you get to that point with your garment, for the most part, it's easy to figure out. Now, next is another 18th century book, and this is Costumes Close Up. So this is from 1750 to 1790. So this is another pattern book. This is all from Colonial Williamsburg, and there's lots of construction tips, patterns for men and women, and children as well. So if you are looking for men's patterns, this book does have men's patterns, which is awesome. Now, some of the patterns in here, like for instance, there's the quilted petticoat, there's pockets, there's mitts, there's breeches. So they have information and photos of extant garments. It's definitely a great resource for the mid to late 18th century. The photos in here are mostly black and white. There's a small section of color photos in the center, but it has the patterns and it tells you the instructions for creating it. I did use this book on page 62. I used this stays pattern for my maternity stays. They were heavily altered, but this is the pattern that I used to base my maternity stays off of. Again, this is a great book. It covers an array of garments in this book, and it also has history in there as well. Next up is From the Neck Up, an illustrated guide to hat making. So this book was actually recommended to me by my millinery teacher in university. So this one was published in 1981. This book goes on, it tells you how to measure your head. There is some patterns in the back of the book, but it also has proportion tips and just construction tips on creating hats. So there is a lot of information in here if you want to get into millinery and you are looking for something that is essentially, it's a very in-depth guide. So if you're looking to get into millinery, this is definitely a good book to pick up. So that was my last pattern book, and now I'm going to be moving on to my reference books. But continuing in the same theme, this is another hat book that I have, which is Women's Hats and Headdresses and Hairstyles. There are 453 illustrations from medieval to modern. This book covers the 7th century all the way up to the 20th century. There's quite an array of hats, hairstyles, caps, just pretty much whatever you put on your head. This book has got some type of illustration to show you. So there are different styles for each time period. In the later time period, it is split up into decades. And so there's a lot more styles. In the earlier ones, there's, I think, a page per century, not decade. But yes, definitely getting into later decades or centuries, there's a lot more information. So there's a lot more photos, or not photos, a lot more drawings of hairstyles, hats, and all the accessories that you can put on your head. I'm not sure if all of these are completely historically accurate, but they do give the look of the time period, which is very helpful if you're unsure of something. So yes, definitely a book that I recommend. English Women's Clothing of the 19th Century. So this book describes and explains more about the English lady of the 19th century. It has an overview for each decade. So there's different type of dresses, outdoor garments, accessories, materials, colors that were popular. There's line drawings, photos, fashions, plates of clothes, and it's all detailed year by year. So that is very helpful if you are starting to plan a costume. And it says right here on the back, there's over 1,100 line and tone drawings and photographs depicting hundreds of outfits. Really enjoy it when I'm researching something, and it just has a lot of information on English women's dress in the Victorian era. So definitely very, very helpful book. So the next one is Victorian and Edwardian Fashions from La Mode Illustrée, I think that's how you pronounce. So this is from the 1816 to 1914. And these are all fashion plates and accessories from the time periods. And then there's also small notes of the garments in question, or the garments in these photos, where they were worn, what they would have been worn with. So yeah, there's just a lot of great information in this book, and the fashion plates are just beautiful. So another fashion plate book is Victorian Fashions and Costumes from Harper Bazaar, and this is 1867 to 1898. And again, this is all fashion plates, illustrations, accessories, and descriptions of the garments in question. It's great for inspiration if you are finding yourself lacking and just want to, imagine what you would look like in some of these outfits. I love just doing that. I love just imagining what it would be like to wear these outfits every day. But then I realized I love sweatpants. There's lots of there's corset photos, there's information about the garment or the fashion plates. Yeah, and just has a lot of great inspiration in this book. My next book is one that when I first got it, I was not impressed by it. I was ready to send it back, but the only reason I kept it was because it was on my reading list for university. Now that I have read through this book and actually realize how amazing this resource is, I am kicking my past self for thinking that it was not a good book. So the book in question is Costume in Detail. Now, this book, it covers garments from 1730 to 1930. And the book covers sketches of extant garments, showing closures, measurements. There's notes about the garment, the materials used, the accessories. And this book also shows some of the garments that are used in the Patterns of Fashion book. So this book pairs great with those books because that book has the patterns and this one shows you how they would have been worn. This book is simply an amazing resource. You can see how many items I have marked in here just for things that I want to make. So yeah, definitely a great book. It has the measurements, it has closure notes, it has materials. So definitely a great book for your library if you are looking for something and you're wanting something that has a lot of information. Definitely worth its money. Now, my next one is if you are really looking to dig into historical fashions. This was a required reading book for my costume history class, and it is the Survey of Historic Costume. Now, the one I have is the 5th edition. So this covers fashion or costume history from 3000 BC all the way up to the 21st century. So this book has a lot of information. It's not a thin book. So this was my textbook for costume history. Definitely there's a lot of information in here. It is very thorough, very in-depth. So let me just read you a little bit from the back. It says, Survey of Historic Costume presents a thorough overview of the Western dress from the ancient world to the trends of today. Each chapter presents significant dates and events for the time period, along with social, cross-cultural, environmental, geographic, and artistic influence of the clothing. Changes of the production of clothing, handmade to high-tech, are also in detail. So there's a lot of information, a lot of photos. If you're really wanting to sink your teeth into costume history, I definitely recommend picking up this book. So the next books I have here are a series, and they are the Fashion in Detail books. So starting off, this is the 17th and 18th century Fashion in Detail books. I mostly use them for inspiration. There's a lot of close-up of garments, which is just fabulous. The detail work in here, the close-up of the shots, it's very inspiring if you're wanting to create something, or if you're just not even wanting to create something, just wanting to look at pretty photos. That's definitely a great resource. There is also the 19th century Fashion in Detail. So this is just all Victorian, and again, lots of close-up photos. Shows undergarments, accessories, just a lot of really pretty photos if you're wanting to feel inspired. And then the last one that I have by the Fashion in Detail is the Fashion in Detail underwear. So again, just these books are great if you're wanting to feel inspired or want to look at pretty photos. That's it for my reference books. And then I have a couple more books left to do here. So the next book that I have on my list is actually not a historical sewing book. It's just a sewing book in general. But this was also on one of my recommended readings for when I went to university. And the book is the Reader's Digest Complete Guide to Sewing. So it's step-by-step techniques for making clothing. The amount of information in this book is great. It's very thorough and comprehensive book on sewing. So it covers fabric and equipment and basic stitches all the way up to tailoring. 90% of the time when I'm unsure about something, I can look in the book and it'll have what I'm looking for. And there's lots of photos, diagrams. Definitely recommend this book for beginners. There's so much information in here. So it even says on the back, it's the ultimate stitch and seam reference book. So yeah, definitely is a very, very good book if you are a beginner. Even if you're not a beginner, it is a great book for just referencing how to do your basics or not so basic stitches. So there's still a lot of stuff in here that I refer back to, which is great. And I've been sewing for 10 years. Actually, more than that. I've been sewing for more than 10 years. So another great book that I definitely recommend here is the Couture Sewing Techniques. This is the revised and updated edition. So it's a lot more in-depth on sewing techniques, and it's definitely, if you want to give your garment that extra oomph, this is the book to pick up. There is so much information in here. It is absolutely amazing. The first half of the book, it all covers the techniques, the tools, the stitches, the finishes, basically all the basic steps of haute couture. Haute couture? I can never know how to pronounce that. So the second half of the book actually covers how to apply these techniques to your work. And then there's different chapters for the different garments. So like pants, tops, dresses, etc. If you want to learn how to make your work even more beautiful or take it to the next level, definitely a very good book to pick up. So the last couple books that I have to share with you are actually ones that I haven't really had a chance to use yet, but I've been looking through them and I'm going to be using them in my 1890s series, which is coming up. So the first book I want to tell you about is The Voice of Fashion. Now this book contains 79 different patterns from 1900 to 1906, and you size up the patterns by using the diamond cutting system or apportioning rulers. I think that's how it's pronounced. So essentially how it works is you you take your bust and your waist measurement, and then you flip to the back of the book and it has all the rulers in there that you need to size up the patterns from the book. So let's just say you are a 38-inch bust. Well, then you go to the back of the book and you grab the ruler that says 38 inches. And there's literally no math involved. When you are sizing up these patterns, you just follow the numbers to create the pattern. And obviously you still need to make a mock-up, but it essentially makes a pattern that fits your body. So Frances Grimble, the author of these books, does have 9 other books that use the scales. Now, I believe the scales did change during the Edwardian era, and so I think that the scales are different depending on the books that you use. Now, the notes in these books, they're really good. They have average, there's a couple of them that have the average fabric that you would need, the type of fabrics that are used. So there's some construction tips. Overall, these are a great bang for your buck. And there's a lot of patterns in these books, which are really, really great. Now, the next 2 books that I have are similar to the Voice of Fashion book, except for these ones do not come with the rulers. So to use these books, I have to use the rulers from the last book. But the first one is Authentic Victorian Fashion Patterns, A Complete Lady's Wardrobe. So this one is from 1890 to 1896. That is the pattern ranges there. There are 50 different patterns in this book, which is amazing considering how much. I think it was like 25 bucks or something. And so they cover just an array of different costumes you would wear, so winter, spring, summer, fall, all the different seasons. Now, this is just a pattern book. There are, I think, no instructions on how to put these together, so you definitely need a bit of a background on sewing if you want to use these books. So yes, and the other one is 59 Authentic Turn of the Century Fashion Patterns. And this is by the same author, Christina Harris. So this one starts in the fall of 1890 and ends in the winter of 1896. So this book also focuses on the sleeves of the late Victorian era. This one mostly has patterns for women in it, but there are a couple patterns for men and children as well. So that is a nice little treat in there. So the next book I have here is the Keystone Jacket and Dress Cutter, a 1895 guide to women's tailoring. So there's 30 different patterns you can draft from this book. It also has illustrations in the back from 1895 and 1896. So just 2 years of illustrations in here, but they are very, very pretty. So there are an array of patterns you can draft from this book. It is mostly jackets, but there are some shirtwaists, some skirts, a cape, sleeves. So there are several different patterns in this book, which is very, very interesting. Now, I believe you may be able to get this one online for free. I think I'll see if I can find the link again. I just find it much easier to work from when I have a hard copy. Now, this is not a sewing book, and there are very minimal construction notes. So again, if you don't have background in sewing, this may not be the best book for you. But I'm excited to see what I can draft from this book. So the next book I have is The Victorian Dressmaker. Now this one is not available on Amazon. You have to order it through Prior Attire. So I got the first edition for my birthday last year, and I am very excited about it. This book has a lot of information. It is covering the entire Victorian era. So there are about 5 to 8 projects for each decade. And the decades are broken up into, well, I guess not quite decades. It's the early Victorian, the crinoline years, the first bustle era, the natural form era, the second bustle era, and the late Victorian. There's an array of different patterns in here. These are all patterns that are one size, so you do again need to size these up to fit your body. So the books, the photos in here are absolutely gorgeous. Isabel did a beautiful job on this book. If you do not want to pay £45 for the book, I believe you can go to her site and get a discounted one because one of the pages was double printed. And so because of that, she is giving a discount on those books. It still has all the same information in it. It's just a slightly lower price. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth it. I am very excited to glean all this information from this book because there's a lot in here. This next book was published in 1951, so there is some information in here that is not 100% correct anymore, but I still really enjoy the book. There's a lot of information. The book is The History of Underclothes. The time frame for this book is 1485 to 1939. So it does have a lot of information. It's not that big of a book, but there's many details in here. There's line drawings, and I do find the authors humorous in some points. So I think it's a good read if you are wanting to learn more about the underclothes. I quite enjoy it, and it covers both men and women. So that is another book that I find not a lot of books cover both men and women or don't really include men at all. So yes, this is a good one. I haven't used it that often yet, but there's a lot of information in the 1890s in here, so I'm using it a lot more frequently right now. Well, you guys, we've reached the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you are interested in purchasing any of the books, I have them all linked in the description below. Keep in mind those links are Amazon affiliate links, so if you do purchase through them, I may receive a small commission. That being said, it doesn't change the price for you, but it helps me to continue to fund my projects for YouTube. Speaking of funding, if you guys are interested at all, this is not required in any way, shape, or form. It's just if you want to go above and beyond in helping me fund my projects, I have started a coffee page. It's similar to Patreon, except for it's not a monthly thing. You can donate once, you can donate as many times as you want, or you don't even have to donate at all. So I will have that link down below. It does help to continue to fund these projects. If you're new to my channel and you liked what you saw today, feel free to click the subscribe button. I post new videos once to twice a month. And for those of you that are already subscribed to me, thank you so much. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down below, and I will do my best to try and reply to everyone. Also, if you can give my video a thumbs up, that really helps my videos get out there to more people, which helps me to continue to create projects. Well, I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!